I'll admit it, I was the guy who tried too hard. Too eager to please, too willing to be overlooked, too ready to accept scraps of affection and call it love. My name's Vernon, and this is the story of how I became invisible in my own home until one scorching afternoon when I went inside to get a bag of ice and the truth burned hotter than the grill outside. It was a humid Saturday in June, the kind of heat that glues your shirt to your back and makes even the lemonade taste salty. We were hosting a barbecue for my wife Marlene's side of the family, her judgmental father who never looked me in the eye, her sister Nadine who called me Vern on purpose, and her twin cousins who always seemed one inside joke away from bursting into laughter at my expense. Still, I smiled. I always do. I'd set up everything by myself, hung those string lights she pinned to her summer vibes board, marinated 3 kinds of meat, even remembered her aunt's weird gluten-free needs. Marlene didn't thank me. She just inspected the setup like she was appraising a used car, then disappeared to do her hair while I reheated the baked beans. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. That today would go smoothly. That maybe, just maybe, her family would finally see how much I cared, how much I tried. That maybe Marlene would look at me with something more than toleration in her eyes. We had music playing, the grill was smoking, and I was passing out drinks when Marlene waved me over and asked if I could get more ice for the coolers. Her tone wasn't kind. It wasn't unkind either. It was hollow, like I was a waiter she'd forgotten she married. I nodded and went inside, wiping my forehead with the back of my hand. The house was silent, unnaturally silent, like it had paused to hold its breath. I headed for the kitchen freezer, already planning to grab the second bag in the basement if this one ran out. But as I yanked the door open and found it half empty, something caught my ear. A noise. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. Just a muffled thump followed by what might have been a gasp. Or maybe a laugh. I wouldn't have thought much of it except for the fact that it came from the laundry room. The one we never used unless it was to dump clean clothes in a pile. I stood still, hands still on the freezer door. I told myself I was imagining things. That someone might have gone inside to take a call. That Marlene's cousin maybe spilled something. But then I heard it again, the voice. And this time it said her name. Marlene. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my wrists. I walked to the laundry room door. It was cracked open just slightly, enough to see the hem of a sundress dragging against the floor. Her sundress. She was whispering something. I don't know why I did it, but I pushed the door open. Just 2 inches more. That's when I saw her back, arched, and 2 legs that weren't mine. That's when I stopped being the man who smiled through everything. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't make a sound. Just stood there, crouched behind the doorframe, staring through that narrow opening like some ghost locked outside of his own life. At first, my mind refused to register what I was seeing. It tried to protect me, convincing me I had misunderstood something, that it wasn't Marlene, that maybe someone had borrowed her dress, that the man with her couldn't possibly be someone I knew. But then she giggled. Not the laugh she gave her coworkers or her father or me when I nervously made one of my little jokes. No, this was that rare, shamefully intimate laugh I hadn't heard in years. The one I used to live for. The one I hadn't earned in so long that I started to believe I never had it in the first place. And then I heard her say, "We have to be quick. He's just grabbing ice." She was talking about me. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not in some theatrical, raging way, but quietly. Like a small glass figurine falling off a shelf, landing on carpet, still breaking in 100 places. I didn't rush in. I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. I just backed away slowly, as if my feet knew something my heart didn't yet fully understand. I walked back through the hallway in a daze, carrying the half-empty bag of ice like it was my last remaining purpose. Outside, everyone was still laughing, eating ribs, passing plates. My hands were shaking and the sun felt harsher, almost accusatory. Marlene came out a few minutes later, fixing her hair with that fake, lazy grace. She grabbed a drink, kissed me on the cheek, and I flinched. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. Either way, it didn't matter. Everything had changed. And she was still playing her role like nothing had happened. That evening, I didn't confront her. I couldn't. I watched her all through dinner. Every bite she took, every laugh she forced, every sideways glance she gave the guests, I studied her like a stranger. And the man? I figured it out by how often he avoided my eyes. Clay. Her coworker. The one she once insisted was like a cousin because they worked together so often. He left early, saying something about his dog. He didn't look back. And Marlene didn't even wave. After everyone left and the last paper plate was thrown away, we were alone again. I was sitting at the kitchen table. She walked past, humming some pop song, drinking rose straight from the bottle. Thanks for doing all the heavy lifting today, she said, barely glancing at me. You really pulled it off. I opened my mouth. I wanted to say something. Anything. But all I managed was, you're welcome. And then she went to shower. I sat there long after the water stopped running. Just me and the faint smell of grilled meat still hanging in the air. I was no longer a husband. I was a prop in my own house. And that night, for the first time in our marriage, I didn't join her in bed. I lay on the couch, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it might eventually give me answers. I laid on the couch that night, not because I was brave or making a statement, but because I couldn't bear to be near her. I could hear the bedroom door click shut hours earlier. No footsteps came looking for me. No curious voice asking where I was. It was like she didn't notice, or worse, didn't care. By morning, I felt like someone had stapled my thoughts into a loop. The image of what I saw in that laundry room replayed again and again. Her back. His hands. Her whisper. He's just grabbing ice. It kept slicing through my brain, and every time it dug a little deeper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her why. But instead, I did what I always did. I got up, made coffee, and cleaned the mess from the night before. By the time she came downstairs, wrapped in her robe and scrolling on her phone like she hadn't just detonated our life, I was already halfway through scrubbing the grill trays. Morning, she muttered, not even looking at me. She poured herself coffee, added oat milk, the expensive kind I drive across town to get for her, then sat down and opened her laptop like it was any other Monday. I stood there with my hands in the sink, watching her. I think I was waiting. Waiting for her to give me a reason not to break. For her to look up and see me. Really see me. But she didn't. She never did. The rest of that day, I moved like a ghost. My coworkers could tell something was off during our Zoom call. One guy asked if I had a cold. I just nodded and muted myself. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, I watched my wife cheat on me yesterday and I'm still processing the fact that I apparently mean so little to her she couldn't even wait until the guests left. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother, not my best friend from college, not even my therapist. I'd quit therapy 2 months ago after Marlene mocked me for needing someone to hold my hand emotionally. It's funny. I used to think love meant forgiving someone for not being perfect. That maybe I was just too soft or too sensitive. But that day, I realized I had confused neglect for patience. I wasn't giving her grace, I was giving her room to forget I existed. That evening, she asked if I wanted to watch a show with her. Some trashy reality thing she loved. I told her I had work. She shrugged and watched alone in the bedroom. Again, no questions. No concern. No curiosity about why I was still distant. Maybe because she already knew the answer. Over the next few days, I began to notice things I had trained myself to ignore. The way her phone was always face down. The extra time she spent getting groceries. The new perfume she hadn't mentioned. The texts she typed while smiling faintly then turned serious when I walked in. I became hyper-aware, not paranoid, just awake for the first time. The cracks weren't new. They were just finally visible to me. And still, I said nothing. Because saying something meant facing the truth, and the truth was that the woman I loved wasn't coming back. And I didn't know yet if I was brave enough to admit I had been left long before I ever found her in that room. By the 4th day, I had memorized her schedule. Not because I was trying to catch her, not at first, but because I had no other way to keep myself from falling apart. Monitoring her routine gave me structure. It gave me something to do while the silence between us grew thick enough to cut with a knife. She had a spin class every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 6:30. She came home sweaty, sure, but her hair was too perfect and her makeup still clung to her eyes like a second skin. I'd never seen her come back from a workout without that flushed, chaotic look of someone who had actually moved. And I didn't say a word. Just nodded when she walked in and said, "Tough ride," like she was describing war. That following Thursday, I decided to follow her. Not in a dramatic, movie-style chase. I just waited 5 minutes after she left, got in my car, and followed at a distance. I felt pathetic. Like a cliché. A weak husband with nothing left but suspicion and too much time to think. But what else did I have? She didn't go to the gym. She didn't even go near it. Instead, she parked at a small residential block 2 towns over and walked up to a beige townhouse I didn't recognize. No spin bikes. No neon-lit mirrors. Just a single-story house with a blue ceramic turtle on the porch. She knocked once. The door opened. She stepped inside. The man who opened it? It was Clay. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard I left finger marks. Clay, her coworker. The one she claimed was a dorky spreadsheet nerd who eats almonds for lunch. The one she had told me just months ago would never be her type. I sat there for 2 hours. My eyes never left the front door. I waited for movement. For proof. For denial. But I didn't get any. The curtain shifted once. A silhouette passed. I couldn't tell if it was her or him or if they were together. But I knew. At some point I started crying. Not sobbing. Not screaming. Just tears that rolled down without permission. I felt humiliated. Less like a husband and more like a failed experiment in loyalty. The world didn't crumble dramatically. It just dissolved around me. Quietly. Slowly. Cruelly. When she came home that night, she was humming. Her hair was down. She smelled like cologne that wasn't mine. And I couldn't stop staring at the turtle keychain dangling from her purse. Blue ceramic. The same color as the one on that porch. I picked us up some ice cream, she said, as if that solved anything. There's mint chocolate chip in the freezer. Your favorite. I didn't say a word. I didn't want ice cream. I wanted answers. But I wasn't strong enough to ask for them yet. Instead, I nodded again and went upstairs to shower, washing away the salt of my tears, the shame, the ache in my chest I didn't even know how to name. I lay awake that night and began to write this post in my head, not because I needed pity, but because I finally understood something. The worst kind of betrayal isn't the affair. It's being erased before your own eyes and realizing you helped hand them the eraser. I spent the next few days rehearsing the conversation over and over in my mind. What I'd say, how I'd stay calm, how I'd ask her directly and give her a chance to come clean. Part of me still wanted to believe there might be a sliver of honesty left in her. That maybe she'd cry, admit the affair, beg for forgiveness, and we could somehow rebuild. I know how weak that sounds. Trust me, I do. But when you've invested years into a person, years into a life, it's easier to fantasize about repair than accept total collapse. That Sunday morning, I woke up early and made coffee like I always did. I didn't need to. I didn't even want coffee. But my hands needed something to do besides tremble. She came down around 10 a.m. still in her robe, scrolling on her phone. She sat across from me, took a sip from the cup I poured her, and said, "You okay? You've been quiet this week." It was the first time she even acknowledged it. And yet, her voice was casual, as if she'd asked me about a work meeting or a grocery list. I set my cup down and looked her in the eyes for the first time in what felt like months. "Who is he?" I asked. She blinked. Once. Then looked away. "What?" "I followed you on Thursday, Marlene. You didn't go to spin class. You went to a house. Clay's house." Her face stayed still, but her fingers tightened slightly around her mug. "You went inside," I continued. "You stayed for 2 hours. I waited. I saw you leave. You smelled different when you came home. Your hair was done. You were humming." She stared at the wall for a few seconds. Then, with terrifying calm, she said, "You had no right to follow me." I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "That's your response?" "I'm not doing this with you, Vernon," she said coldly, standing up. "You don't get to play the victim when you've been emotionally absent for years." My jaw clenched. Emotionally absent? I planned every vacation. I paid for your car. I built your stupid garden beds. I learned how to make oat milk lattes because you said Starbucks was too commercial. You think that's love? She snapped. Tasks? Chores? You think being nice is the same as being a partner? I stood up, shaking. I loved you. I still do, God help me. But you let this happen. You chose this. And now you want to make it my fault. She looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. I'm not happy, Vernon. Haven't been in years. You're weak. You always have been. I needed more. That one hurt. Not because it was surprising, but because I'd always feared she thought that, and now she confirmed it. So what now? I asked, voice cracking. You keep sneaking around? Or you finally walk out for good? Marlene didn't answer. She just walked back upstairs, slammed the bedroom door, and didn't come out for hours. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the half-empty coffee cup across from me. It was still warm. Everything was still warm. And yet I'd never felt so cold in my entire life. After the confrontation, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't awkward anymore, it was intentional. It was war declared without bullets. We walked around each other like strangers passing in a waiting room, both pretending not to feel the crack spreading across everything we had built. I kept hoping she'd knock on the bedroom door and say she was sorry. That she'd sit down, cry, admit it all, and we'd somehow start the hard, painful work of healing. Instead, she shut down completely. No apology. No remorse. Just distance. Like I was now a roommate she regretted taking in. I should have kicked her out. That's what any self-respecting man would have done. But I didn't. Because deep down I was still holding on to this twisted illusion that maybe this was just a phase, something driven by boredom, a selfish midlife rebellion, something that could end if I just tried hard enough. I thought if I reminded her of who we were before things went cold, maybe she'd come back. Like a ghost retracing her old steps. So I made a mistake. I tried. I planned a dinner. Cooked her favorite food. Candles, wine, music. I even wore the shirt she once said made me look decently attractive back when she used to throw compliments like lifelines. She walked in, paused for half a second, and then, "I'll never forget this," she sighed. Not a happy sigh. An annoyed one. Like I just handed her a task she hadn't asked for. "What's all this?" she said, arms folded. "I just thought we could talk. Maybe reset." She didn't sit. She didn't smile. She just stared at me and said, "You still think this is something we can fix? Don't you?" She blinked, slow and heavy, then stepped away from the table. "I've been thinking," she said, "about moving out. Maybe we both need space. I'm not saying it's over, but I need to figure out what I want." And just like that, everything inside me sank. Not because she said she might leave, but because I realized in that moment she already had. She wasn't thinking about saving us. She was planning her exit. The affair wasn't a mistake. It was a stepping stone. "You've already figured it out," I said quietly. "You just don't have the guts to say it out loud." She didn't deny it. She walked upstairs. I stood in the kitchen alone, the food going cold, the candles still burning, and I just stood there, listening to her footsteps vanish behind the bedroom door that used to be ours. That night, I sat in my car for hours. Parked at the edge of town where the old railroad yard meets a crumbling bridge. No one else around. Just me thinking. Not about her. About me. Who I was before her. Who I became during all this. And who I might have to be now without her. I realized something in that moment. I hadn't just lost my wife. I'd lost my identity. I didn't know how to live outside the role of Marlene's husband. I'd built everything around that one fragile idea, that she loved me. That she needed me. But she didn't. She needed someone else. And I needed to stop pretending she might change her mind. The man she married had died somewhere along the way, and she hadn't bothered to tell me. I'd just been walking around in his clothes, waiting for a reunion that would never come. Now, for the first time, I started wondering what it might look like to stop waiting. A week after she mentioned taking space, Marlene packed 2 suitcases while I was at work. She didn't tell me where she was going. No tearful goodbye, no final conversation. Just a short note on the kitchen counter written in her usual rushed, lowercase scrawl. "Vernon, I need time. This isn't goodbye, just space. Please don't make this harder than it already is. M." That was it. No address. No contact info. Just a statement of fact. She was done pretending. When I walked into the empty kitchen and saw that note, something inside me gave up. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, aching collapse. I opened the refrigerator, still half full with groceries we once shared, and realized I had no idea what I liked to eat without her. Even the mustard felt like hers. Over the next few days, I moved through the house like a squatter in someone else's life. Every room felt like it had been staged for someone else's comfort. The throw pillows were her taste. The wall prints were quotes she picked. Even the bath towels were too soft, the kind she insisted we order from some overpriced catalog. There was no trace of me in any of it. The silence grew teeth. It gnawed at the walls and curled up next to me in bed. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. expecting her body next to mine, the faint scent of her hair, the tug of her leg brushing against mine in her sleep. Instead, I got nothing. Just cold sheets and the sharp realization that I'd been lying to myself for far too long. One night, I opened the drawer next to her side of the bed. I don't know why, maybe I was looking for a clue or just something to prove I hadn't imagined it all. That's when I found it, a second phone. A burner. It was cheap and old, but it still worked. And it wasn't password protected. The texts were still there. Months' worth of messages between her and Clay. Pages of late-night exchanges filled with inside jokes, lewd suggestions, travel plans, and photos I wish I could erase from my memory. She called him things she'd never once called me. She shared parts of herself I didn't even know existed anymore. There were messages from the night of the barbecue mocking me. Saying how easy it was. How blind I was. Clay. He doesn't have a clue, does he? Marlene. Not a one. He was literally outside grilling chicken thighs while I was moaning in the laundry room. I nearly dropped the phone. My fingers were numb, my jaw locked. And in that moment, it didn't matter how emotional or sensitive I was. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. I wasn't even sad. I was erased. Rewritten. Turned into a joke, a background prop, a storyline in someone else's fantasy. She didn't just betray me. She humiliated me. I sat on the floor of our bedroom for hours, phone in my lap, trying to remember the last time she kissed me with meaning. Or laughed at one of my dumb jokes. Or looked at me like a man instead of a placeholder. And what scared me most was realizing I couldn't remember. She hadn't just left the house. She had walked out with every shred of intimacy we'd ever had, leaving behind a hollow shell of our marriage. One she had been peeling apart behind my back for months while I was still hoping a new dinner recipe might spark something between us again. And even then, sitting in the wreckage of it all, I didn't yell. I didn't smash anything. I didn't drive over to Clay's house with fists clenched and justice on my mind. Instead, I got up, walked to the kitchen, and made a sandwich. Because sometimes when your world ends, all you can do is survive the next 10 minutes. The days that followed were strange, like living inside the shell of someone else's life. I kept expecting the sound of the garage door, the smell of her perfume drifting through the hallway, the familiar thud of her heels on the staircase. But she never came back, not for her coffee mug, not for her garden gloves, not even for the second phone she had hidden so carefully. For the first time in years, the house was quiet in a way that didn't hurt. I didn't realize how much noise she had brought with her, not the literal kind, but the tension, the weight of her disappointment, the subtle disdain that had infected every corner of my daily life. Once she was gone, it was like the air itself began to breathe again. I started making small changes. At first, just out of necessity, washing my own clothes, cooking meals that didn't involve oat milk or avocado substitutes. But slowly, it turned into something more. I repainted the bedroom walls a deeper color. Replaced the art on the living room walls with vintage music posters I'd always liked but never dared to hang. I even threw out the beige dishes she loved so much and bought a mismatched set from a thrift store, not because they were stylish, but because they were mine. I called my brother, the one I hadn't spoken to in months. I told him the whole story. And instead of pity, he gave me the kind of laughter I didn't know I needed. She cheated on you, he said. Buddy, you were the best part of that marriage. That night, we drank beer and grilled burgers in my backyard. No guests, no pretending, no performance. Just two brothers sitting under the string lights I had once hung for a woman who never noticed them. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. But fully. Loudly. Like someone who remembered what joy felt like. Marlene never reached out. No calls. No emails. And after a few weeks, I didn't expect her to. I figured she had moved in with Clay or found another man to entertain her boredom. I didn't care anymore. Because something inside me had shifted, I was done waiting to be chosen. Instead, I chose myself. I started hiking again, something I'd given up because she didn't like dirt. I found a local bookstore that hosted poetry nights. I signed up for one, read a piece I scribbled on a napkin, and afterward, a woman named Rochelle with curly red hair and a mischievous grin told me I had the saddest eyes and the warmest voice. We got coffee the next week. It wasn't a movie romance. She didn't fix me, but she listened. She asked questions. She cared. And more importantly, she saw me. Not as a project. Not as a disappointment. But as a human being worth knowing. And that's when I knew I'd survived it all. Marlene didn't destroy me. She set me free. I had spent years shrinking to fit inside her world. Now I was building my own, uneven, imperfect, beautiful in ways she would never understand. And as I stood one evening on my back porch, a cold drink in hand, music playing low in the background, I looked at those same string lights, still glowing, and I smiled. Because I had finally remembered what they were for. Not to impress anyone, but to light the way home.